Welcome to Week in Review. You know, when I became a Christian over 50 years ago, somebody gave me a book by Francis Schaeffer. This was 45 years ago that this book came out. And this book was really from a brilliant man. Maybe you've heard of Francis Schaeffer. And it was called How Should We Then Live? And that title comes from Ezekiel chapter 33 and verse 10, where people were undergoing some very dark and difficult times, and they asked that question. Today, many people are saying the same thing today. How then shall we live? Well, we have to face the reality that there is massive deception, which is what Jesus said at the end of the age would be the number one signpost. Take heed that you're not deceived. And I want to challenge you to be courageous in this hour. Some people have said to me, and maybe they've said it to you, hey, don't get into some of these hot button topics. You know what? Don't rock the boat. And you know what we should say is, I don't want to rock the boat. I want to sink the boat. By that, I mean this, where there's false information and propaganda and narratives that are being perpetrated in the culture today that are contrary to God and His design and His will. We have to have courage to speak up. Now, kudos to a young girl, Elizabeth Turner in Michigan, in a large high school. Maybe you heard about this. She was asked to give the valedictorian address. Well, she responded, she wrote out her address, but when she submitted it in advance, the principal said, oh, no, you can't do this because you're mentioning Jesus and you can't mention the Bible and God. And well, you know what? She didn't cower. She prayed, she got counsel from Christian attorneys, and they brought it before the principal, and they confronted her in a winsome and loving but firm way. Well, the principal backed down, and this young lady showed her courage and perseverance, and she gave the address, acknowledging and honoring Jesus Christ. We need to follow that example. You know, I remember when I lived in D.C., there was this big event one day at a university, and lots of students went. Hundreds of people went. Well, I went because I thought, what is this all about? Peace and love and somebody from another country. Well, the guy was sitting on the stage in robes, and he was what they call a faker. He was somebody that was talking transcendental meditation and all kinds of, high-sounding phraseology was being used. But at the end, I thought, I can't just stand here and let these students be deceived. So I stood up and I said, Sadhguru, I would like to ask you, do you believe that Jesus Christ is fully God and that He came into this world and died on the cross for our sins and rose from the dead? You know what he said? He said, oh, sit down, please. No question, no question. And students booed. They said, be quiet. To me, sit down, shut up. I tried my very best, though. And you know what happened? I said to everybody, I said, if you're here now, you're being deceived. And if you believe in Jesus Christ, that He is the Son of God, I encourage you, join me and let's leave this auditorium. Well, a number got up and we walked out. And in the lobby, I encouraged them. Do you know that later one of those people that left came to me and said, you know, I came to that auditorium, not sure what was going on, but I always had this thought, if I ever saw somebody that was a real Christian, authentic, and really was bold and lived what he thought, I'd want to be a Christian. Well, he became a Christian, and now, listen to this, 40 years later, I had the privilege to disciple and mentor this guy. He is a lead pastor in a mega church in the D.C. area. Be courageous. As Billy Graham said, courage is contagious. Now, this is very critical today because we're living in a time where honest standards of journalism and in the media have collapsed. They've collapsed. So when you're listening to news or whatever, you have to be very discerning and really understand what's coming forth today because there's false narratives that are being put forth. Corporations run the media today. Did you know that? Like Disney runs ABC. That's why if you ever watch The View and you say, how do they get away with this kind of nonsense and this leftist ideology and all this socialism and that? Well, Disney's running it and you do what Disney wants you to do. The same thing with what? AT&T runs CNN. And so when you have CNN and you say, I can't understand. They hated the former president. What's wrong? There's oligarchs, there's leaders, just like at big tech, and they tell you this is what you do or you don't have your job. And Jeff Bezos, he was no fan of Donald Trump, but you know what? Jeff Bezos What does he do? He runs the Washington Post. And so you have Associated Press and USA Today, and you say they become radical leftist socialist leaning enterprises. That's right. And that's why you've got to be not only courageous, but alert and discerning. Let me tell you a fact. Do you know that the objective polls and news media proved that during the Trump administration, 90% of the news on Donald Trump was negative, 90%. And you say, yeah, he brought about the Abrahamic Accord and brought Arab nations together. That was historic, and we had a strong economy. And he pioneered the COVID vaccine and deployment of it quickly. And we had the robust economy, and we had such a strong showing among minorities with jobs and all of these positives, but they weren't reported. What was emphasized was what? Russian collusion, which was fake. It was a false narrative for 3 years. And then we had the, insurrection on the mall and the cop that was shot. There was no cop shot. He died of a stroke. And so what you have is an emphasis in the media against that which is traditional, conservative, and yes, very much so Judeo-Christian. But when you look at Mr. Biden, he gets the pass. People ignore in the media the negatives. Look at the catastrophe on our southern border today. It's a humanitarian crisis. Over 500,000 illegal aliens have come in, and it's all downplayed, just like Democrat-run cities with spiking, escalating, explosive violence and crime and killing. Chicago, St. Louis, and D.C. and L.A. go on down the line. But Mr. Biden gets a pass. Now, I want to challenge you in 3 areas. You need to be strong. And when somebody says, oh, Larry, don't get into this kind of stuff. Don't rock the boat. Don't talk about like abortion, same-sex marriage, transgender, or whatever it is. Don't rock the boat. And there's many pastors that go down this path. You need to say to them, look, I'm not interested in rocking the boat. I want to sink it where there's deception and falsehood. Let me give you 3 areas. Number 1, when we talk about our president right now, this man, Mr. Biden, do you know that he has proposed a spending in a new budget, $6 trillion budget? You say, is it that much? Yes. And of course, what's the narrative? Well, the rich are going to pay for this. There'll be no increased tax except on the rich. The rich can't cover this kind of stuff. We're going to have a deficit every year of $1.3 trillion. Who's going to pay for that? Well, what's going to happen is it's going to be taxation, and there's going to be new regulations, and it'll be taxes that, like on, what you see with gas now, 30% increase since Mr. Biden came into the White House. Where's that coming from? Why are groceries going up? Well, the oil companies know they're under attack right now. Green New Deal and all of these things. And so they stockpile their money. They have to raise prices on gas. That's then passed on to who? The truckers that bring the food, etc. And then when that prices go up that way with the truckers, then in the grocery stores, it goes up in the supermarkets, and it's passed on to you. And you will find taxation on your what? On internet in the coming days, wealth tax, a value-added tax on gas and groceries and heating, and it's going to impact you. And you need to realize we have the most leftist president right now ever in America's history. Not just somebody that's liberal, but I'm saying leftist. And this budget, you say, well, why is he doing this, proposing all this? Well, he has influence from those around him to push a socialistic system in our country. Yes, socialism. You said, well, I remember Mr. Trump said, we'll never be socialist. Well, with Mr. Trump out of office and Mr. Biden in there, and as a puppet and as a pawn, he's being controlled. They're telling him what to do. This president is more radical and leftist than Bernie Sanders. That's fact. And so he's doing this because he wants to see equity. Not equality first, but equity. That means people that are lower income be brought up to a middle class. That's his goal. That's what they're pushing. And so you say, can he get away with this? Well, let me tell you this, that in 1935, there was something proposed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a Democrat. And what was it? It was called the National Recovery Act. You can research this. 80-some years ago, he wanted to see the United States government control the commerce and manufacturing and everything. The Supreme Court, though, stopped him, and they ruled in the National Recovery Act that it's unconstitutional. And they said it gives too much power to the government. Well, that needs to be said today. And you need to be discerning, because this is now some time where you have to ask yourself, should I have voted for this man? Well, there are repercussions to it, and you see it every day. That's an area you need to not just say, well, don't rock the boat. We need to sink the boat, in a sense, and not go along with this. I'll tell you another area. Number two is that you have the progressives pushing Israel out and what? Endorsing and promoting the Palestinians. And they say, well, you see what's going on in Israel today, and they're colonizing and they're occupying, and look what they're doing. They're killing these poor Arab families. And there'll be pictures that'll be, bleeding heart liberals showing about a family. Well, Hamas is committed with their missiles, and guess what? Israel faced a bombardment over 11 days of over 4,000 rockets that were sent. They have to defend themselves. But you have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her squad, and they're pushing Biden, Iran deal, let's go. Iran is supplying the rockets. They are. And so they get them where? Where does Iran get it? They get it from China and from Russia. And so when you say, well, we got to stand up, against Israel. Israel in 1947 was the United Nations gave the land. There was an exodus and it was partitioned. And you say, well, why don't we have a two-state solution? It's been on the table and proposed many times. The PLO was given that opportunity many years ago, and Yasser Arafat, the leader, said, no, we don't want it. They want to wipe Israel off the map. This is a spiritual battle, and we need to take the right stand. And I'll tell you this, Satan hates Israel. Why? Because Israel is the nation. God said they're my chosen people. And Jerusalem is mine, God says. The city of David. I've been to Israel numerous times. So this is not an apartheid system and Israel's taken over. Israel takes care of the Arabs. They let them vote, the ones that are citizens. They can be in the Knesset, their parliament. They can be judges. They treat them better than the Arab nations around them. So you need to be discerning. And if somebody says, hey, Larry, don't rock the boat, you need to sink that boat in terms of a false narrative. Let me give you one third one, and that's this. There's many people today that are finally wising up to the Black Lives Matter Foundation. Now, again, the slogan, Black Lives Matter, yes, all lives do matter. But you have individuals that are avowed Marxists. They're what? Two of them are lesbians. And did you know that recently, one of them, the executive director, Patrice, well, she says, well, I resigned. Well, the really word is that she was ousted. Why? Because she was being exposed. They found out that she spent, how much? $3.2 million on luxurious property and housing. And then there was reports of her in the Bahamas. Yeah, looking at expensive land, just like the place where Justin Timberlake has land and Tiger Woods and others. Well, all this was coming out. And last year, they took in over $90 million. Corporations, virtue signaling. Well, let's give $10 million. Let's show that we're really against systemic racism and all the rest of that. And so as a result of that, people said, well, where did the money go? Well, it went to the foundation who then turned it over to, I don't know how they get all this. Where's that money going? Well, you look right now, chapters all over the United States are rising up. There's at least 10 of them that have said there's no real accountability, there's no real transparency, and they're speaking out against it. In Louisville, the young lady that was killed, and there was a settlement, in the midst of it, and there was all the racial riots and all the rest of that. You know that the mother of the girl that had been killed in the midst of this tragic event, you know what she says now of Black Lives Matter, this foundation? It's a fraud. I want to quote to you something right now, and this is real and very real. And this is a man that was an insider right there in Minnesota. You say, oh yeah, that's where, the shooting a year ago and all that took place, Well, do you know what? That there is a man now that's saying, I see what they're all about and what they're doing. And so he issued a statement. And he says, this is wrong what they're doing. And I want to read it. I'm going to put it on the screen. This is the statement from Mr. Turner. Here's what he said. He said this. He said, oh, I love these words. Follow slow. He said, after a year on the inside, I learned they had little concern for rebuilding black families, and they cared even less about improving the quality of education for students in Minneapolis, Turner said in his video. listen to this, that was made clear when they publicly denounced charter schools alongside the teachers union. I was an insider in Black Lives Matter, and he says this, and I learned the ugly truth, the what? The moratorium on charter schools does not support rebuilding the black family, but it does create barriers to a better education for black children. I resigned from Black Lives Matter after a year and a half, but I didn't quit working to improve black lives and access to a great education. Now that guy had courage. Somebody could have said to him, hey, don't rock the boat. But he said, no, I don't want to rock the boat. I want to sink the boat. I want to put one more thing on the screen, and that's this. If you are ever faced with a situation where they say, your son can't speak in his classroom or can't give a valedictorian address or some message and mention Jesus or the Bible in his speech, don't you believe it. I want you to look on the screen, and I'm going to read to you what was said to this principal that made her back down. Ready? Here's what it said. It says, so what does the law really say? According to the U.S. Department of Education, students or other graduation speakers may not be restricted from referencing religious content or even delivering prayers. Hillsdale, that's the school that Turner went to, the girl, high school, must comply with the law by allowing, look at this, private student religious expression during graduation. Now that was the statement. And I'm saying to you today, how then should we live? How now shall we live? That means we live courageous. We draw on the power of God, the power of the Holy Spirit, but we don't back down. And if somebody says to you in a church, a pastor, some of these issues, they're hot button, don't get into them, don't rock the boat. Lovingly look at them, say, I'm not interested in rocking the boat. I want to sink the boat. I want to take my stand for the truth.